Welcome to episode number 140 of the Marine Layer podcast. We welcome on Mariners broadcaster Gary Hill Jr. We get an update on the food scene on the road, discuss the offense getting back on track, and who might be available at the trade deadline. We have our two Mariners storylines. The Mariners do an injury swap this week. Jorge Polanco comes back, and Bryan goes on the injured list. We'll also dive into the home road drop-off with the Mariners pitching staff.
Here's our reminder to all our Marine Layer Pod listeners. Stay on top of all of our stuff by downloading our episodes and leaving a 5-star review, leaving a written review. That's all on the audio side of the podcast. If you're listening, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like, make sure to comment, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And check us out across social media on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube Shorts at Marine Layer Pod.
Let's get it rolling.
The pitch from Acevedo. A drive feet to right field. Down the line. The Mariners win this game 2-1. The dream lives. They're going to the playoffs. 1-1 from Jansen. There you go. Left field. We got a tie ball game. Julio. Oh, baby, what a moment. Tie ball game at 7-7.
And we welcome you to this episode of the Marine Layer podcast, part of the Just Baseball Podcast Network. Recording Tuesday evening, June 25th, and I've come to a conclusion. I guess I'm not allowed back in the state of Tennessee because when I go to the state of Tennessee, Lyle, getting back from Nashville yesterday, I don't think the Mariners liked it very much.
Well, they won one game against the Marlins during your trip, and that was it.
Yeah, well, I guess no more trips back to Nashville. It's a shame because I liked it. I'll talk about it a little bit more on Friday's episode. But, yeah, they didn't like it very much. The home road thing, Lyle, the road struggles will be a theme of this podcast. And we'll talk about that in our second Mariners storyline. Man, what is it about the state of Florida?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for you on Florida. They should have swept that series against the Marlins. They didn't.
No, they didn't.
I was going to say, is it something about... I was trying to make some Florida man joke, but I can't think of one off the rip here. So I don't know if Florida, if the Florida man impact is impacting the Mariners or something.
And you said it before we started recording. If the Mariners went to Cleveland, lost 2 of 3 to a good team, then you go to Miami, you win 2 of 3, or you sweep, and then you play a tough series against the Rays. Say they salvage when this episode comes out tomorrow on Wednesday. And, yeah, it's not a great road trip, but that's about how teams do on the road. You go 500 on the road, and you win a ton of games at home. The Mariners won a ton of games at home, go on the road and not just lose, but look pretty terrible doing it and get some, pretty bad injury news out of it as well. So just ultimately disappointing. I think those Marlins games, hopefully it doesn't stick. Like, it doesn't stick with you or I very, very long. I hope it becomes an afterthought. They get back home this week and they play a lot better. Starting with the Orioles are next. No, Orioles.
You start with the Twins.
Twins. Yeah, the Twins back on Friday, but hopefully it's just an afterthought, right? Because it is at the front of the mind right now. We answered a mailbag question a couple weeks ago. That was, what would be a comfortable division lead at the All-Star break for you to feel confident about the Mariners winning the division? You said 8. I think I said 10. Given the series that were coming up, if they were still going to be 10 games ahead of the Astros and the Rangers at the break, I'd say, yep, I'd feel pretty confident after about a month's worth of games eclipsed from that point to the All-Star break. Well, it reached 10 games, Lyle, after sweeping the Rangers. It's down to 4.5 if the Astros win today. 4.5. In a week, it went 5.5 games.
That's got to be some kind of record. I'm sure it's not, but it feels like it is. I brought something to the podcast here that I wanted to open with. I even brought a special prop to do it with this 10 right here. So, after seeing what the Mariners have done on this road trip and seeing what they've done offensively for most of the year, I hope people are watching on YouTube for this part. If you're listening, watch this part on YouTube, because I'm going to do my best Skip Bayless impression here because I got something to say. All right, ready, action. In the end, you know it and I know it. They need to go get that guy, Kyle Daniel Tucker. How did I do?
Okay, so here's my tweak. So first of all, I should have been the one to say ready, set, action because of the video you're trying to imitate. His wife is who records it, right? Yeah, so she records it. And next, so we might need a fancier recording setup for this. So Skip will stand around the corner of his kitchen where you can see his shadow. You can see him standing there and waiting to go. And then you hear like, I think she'll usually like hit the desk for him to go or hit the counter, something for him to go. And then you hear it. And then you get that. Now, in those videos, he's usually huffing and puffing to his trash can to throw some jersey out. I don't know if you're throwing a jersey out today, Lyle. In fact, you might be opening the trash can of the Houston Trash Can Astros and picking up a Kyle Tucker jersey.
So, I would say yes if this was one of those reacting to a win or loss type videos, but I'd say more what I channeled here. That's like what he'll do on Undisputed. He's got the pen in the hand. He's waving it around. He's slamming the desk. So that was more a segment at the desk. I was trying to do my best Skip Bayless. I can't do it as well as Josh Rosen, the guy on Twitter who does the Unreal impressions, but I wanted to give my best impression. So it was not like Ernestine filming Skip Bayless chucking a jersey in the trash. It was more like at the desk of Undisputed. But.
Okay, if we're at the desk, then I have one more tweak for you.
Okay.
You didn't butt in to say it was your turn loud enough.
Oh, my bad. Yeah, to scream, it's my turn.
Yeah. Stop.
However, I stand by my statement as everybody listening to this or who listens to this podcast knows. I want Kyle Tucker. Shocker.
What are you willing to do for Kyle Tucker? I heard you made a proclamation over the weekend that you would do something.
So I would say I fired off an emotional tweet after Monday's loss, because I legitimately tweeted out saying, if the Mariners go trade for Kyle Tucker, I will climb on my hands and knees up Mount Everest. Now, as TJ tried to talk me off the ledge saying, you're going to fly to Nepal, buy a round trip plane ticket and actually do that. And I was like, well, it would make for a great vlog. However, I might not have the time or resources.
Let me fill the listeners in on a couple of key details of Lyle's ask on this trade should the Mariners make this. Lyle, if you don't mind me sharing, A, doesn't travel very much. B, doesn't hike very much. So to ask Lyle Goldstein to travel across the world to, like, Nepal is a pretty decently touristy place because of Mount Everest, only for him to scale the tallest peak in the world. I'm like, why don't we do something you're actually going to do?
Okay, so after 24 hours of reflection here, while I might not fly to Nepal, I'll amend what you said a little bit. I'll travel in the U.S. You're right in the sense of I don't really travel outside the country much. Like I've just never, like, I guess I don't have that much of a drive to do it, at least these days, or actually, I've never really, at least up to this point in my life, and I have not gone out and done it much. So anyway, something along the lines of what I will do. I will do some type of grueling physical activity if they trade for Kyle Tucker. Like, if somebody wants to make me, like, crawl a mile on my hands and knees or find some mountain in the Pacific Northwest to climb up, hey, we could do a whole vlog out of it. It's like local podcaster keeps his promise and goes through absolute physical labor. Now, the Mariners have to go trade for Kyle Tucker, but I will stand by this. Will I necessarily climb Mount Rainier on my hands and knees? Well, listen, baseball gods, if you can hear me, we're up for negotiation here because, like, I'm begging on my hands and knees for the Mariners to go get this guy. And I'm sure we've got listeners saying, it's never going to happen. They're never going to do it. It's unrealistic. It's in the division. Yeah, great. I'm still going to try to speak it into existence. And if they actually pull it off, I will stick through with this promise and go through some type of manual labor. I don't know. Actually, is manual labor the right word? I don't know. It's a physical labor.
It is physical. Labor is the wrong word. A physical challenge is the right one. So you might be wondering what I'm doing here in the background, Lyle. I'm doing some research for you. I'm thinking of a more realistic climbing option for you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think the obvious one in the state of Washington, Mount Rainier.
Yeah.
Now, it might not be the 20, I don't know off the top of my head how tall Everest is, in the 20s. It's pretty tall. Mount Rainier's not quite that tall. But you would like to know, Lyle, Mount Rainier, a height of a little bit over 14,000 feet above sea level, there have been about 200,000 people that have summited that mountain. Now, I think that might be a little bit more your speed. Now, is it easy? No. 14,000 feet above sea level is pretty tall.
Mm-hmm.
But since 200,000 people have done it, I think we have a winner for you. I think if you're going through with this, you are climbing up that mountain to the top.
You know, we can vlog it all because that'll turn into content. So,
yeah.
Listen, if the Mariners actually acquire Kyle Tucker at this trade deadline, fine. I will climb up Mount Everest. This feels like a pardon my take type of bet. Remember a few years ago where it was like, oh, if Duke loses, Hank has to go own a cat or something like that. It feels like that, where I'm agreeing to like a pretty ridiculous challenge here. However, I want all our listeners to sit here and realize this is the length I'm willing to go to see an elite corner outfielder be added to this team at the deadline. Like, we are not the GMs. We don't get to make baseball decisions. However, I know the baseball gods can hear us. And if they can, I'm telling you, I will fulfill this challenge if Kyle Tucker's a Mariner.
I'm going to ask the listener, what do you think is a more likely scenario at this point? Do you think it is more likely that the Mariners will trade for Kyle Tucker or that Lyle will summit Mount Rainier? Leave your comments down below. I think I have a pretty good idea of which one I would choose.
Okay.
I think.
I want people to know. These are the lengths I'm willing to go. Like, and again, like if we actually go through with this, or like the trade happens and I have to do it, like we're vlogging it all because content doesn't stop. Like, we're here for it. If anything, it's a win-win. So I hope it happens. I hope I'm forced to hike Mount Everest. Sorry, Mount Rainier. Rainier.
Do you want to know my answer?
What?
I think Kyle Tucker's more likely than you making it up that mountain.
TBD.
Well, I know you, dog.
Well, you get to rest. You don't have to, like, you can take rests.
Oh, you can. Yeah. A lot of them. You'll need a lot of them.
Well, we'll pick a Mariners off day, and we'll do it.
You ever climbed up a mountain with 2 picks?
Oh, I wasn't planning on using picks. Am I going to need them?
Oh, do you think there's just a path, a rocky path all the way to the top?
I don't know. I don't hike.
Oh, exactly. Here's your homework, dog. I want you to go on YouTube and watch some videos of what people need to do to climb Mount Everest. If you think there's like just a nice stone path all the way to the top of the mountain, you would be mistaken.
All right. And you know what? We're open to ideas here. So we're for the people. We're for the listeners. If you have better ideas for physical challenges you think would be best for me to go through if Kyle Tucker becomes a Mariner, please DM us. Please drop it in the YouTube comments because we will be open to ideas. And again, if Kyle Tucker gets acquired by the Seattle Mariners, I am doing something. I will pay my debts to the baseball gods for their favor. But I just need to know from the people what they most want to see. And again, we will vlog it if it happens too. We will turn it into content.
How about this? So here's another option I have for you before we actually talk about Mariners baseball and what they've actually done this week. You can tell how well they played based off what we were talking about at the start of this episode. How about you? So if you don't want to climb up, you could hike the entire Pacific Crest Trail, the state of Washington part of the Pacific Crest Trail. You won't have to go up as much. You might not have to scale a rocky wall or an ice wall, but it is a lot of walking.
That could be one. Again, well, like, what if I agreed to do an army crawl for like half a mile or a mile too? Like, because that's on your stomach.
Is this baseball conditioning?
Well, it's a long way. Think about how long a mile is, like on your stomach just crawling.
Well, I think your high school baseball coach would say, no, that's actually going to be 2 miles.
Well, I could do 2 miles. Again, listen, it's up to the listeners. Whatever you want to see, drop it in the comments, and we will turn it into content. But that is my demand. That's my request. I hope the baseball gods are listening, because I'm willing to sacrifice here.
Okay. Let's get to our Mariners storylines now and talk about real life things instead of hypotheticals. Let's start off with the injuries this week. Where would you like to start? Do you want to start with Bryan Woo? Let's start with Bryan Woo because it's the most recent, and then we'll talk about Jorge Polanco. So Bryan Woo was pitching yesterday on Monday, comes out of the game in the 4th inning on a 60th pitch, strained his hamstring. He had no prior, didn't feel anything in his hamstring until that pitch. It seems minor, but he's going on the IL. He was announced on the IL today. I would guess, Lyle, that we're not seeing Bryan Woo until after the All-Star break. They're going to give him a little bit of rest. The way the schedule works out, he will come off the IL 6 days before the All-Star break starts. And you would have imagined that Bryan Woo would have been last out of the rotation out of the All-Star break. So it makes sense that with all the off days before that break, that they're going to give him that time off. They're going to let his arm rest up. They're going to let his hamstring rest off because hamstrings are pretty nasty and they last a while, and that they hope to have him fully healthy and not worrying about fatigue or anything down the stretch run of the season. Does that check out?
So it does. I was going to say, if Bryan Woo actually spent the minimum 15 days on the IL, he would make one start before the All-Star break. That would be sometime either in the 2-game set on the road against the Padres or in the 4-game series in Anaheim before the All-Star break occurs. You're probably right that unless he is absolutely all systems go to make that one final start before the break, the Mariners will probably opt to just let him get some extra rest. And then, like you said, have him be the last guy to start out of the All-Star break when everybody's fully rested anyway. Well, unless you have guys in the All-Star game, because then wouldn't Logan be the last guy out, or Kirby, or whoever?
Well, if Logan pitches an inning, he could be third and get full rest.
Or fourth.
Yeah, or fourth. Yeah, but I would imagine, since the question coming into the season was about how they're going to manage Bryan Woo's innings. Well, the injury is unfortunate, but his innings are now managed. Once he comes back healthy, given he stays healthy the rest of the season, there should be no limit, really. Like, they're going to build him back up, but once he's built up, I don't think there's going to be a limit.
Right. So, to that point, if Woo is the last guy out of the rotation, out of the All-Star break, that would put him in line to start at home Tuesday, July 23rd against the Angels. That's about a month's time Bryan Woo would miss, which sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, with the All-Star break, with the IL stint, he'd miss about 3 starts, and that's it. He could miss 2 if he's really all systems go before the All-Star break, but you're probably right that between the arm injury, between the hamstring injury, even though they say the hamstring injury is fairly minor, they're probably just going to let him have it rest, and then hopefully he is truly 100% firing on all cylinders for the second half of the year. So, yes, it sounds like a long time to go a month without seeing Bryan Woo, but that is probably what they'll opt to do, and hopefully that has cleared Bryan Woo of all injuries for the remainder of the year. That is the hope, because that's a lot of time that he'll be able to rest everything up and hopefully get back to normal.
So they're going to need, 2 starts out of that spot between now and the All-Star break, given the off days? Like that's what it. So they have an off day on Thursday. They'll again have an off day next Monday, and then they'll have an off day every Monday until the All-Star break. So they would need 2 starts out of that spot.
Yeah, so Scott Service hasn't said yet exactly what they're going to do with Woo's spot in the rotation. They may skip a start. They may skip his start with the off days built in. They haven't confirmed that yet. They said they're thinking about it, so it is possible. And if that's the case, yeah, you need 2 starts. And honestly, that's not the end of the world. That's essentially then 2 games you'd miss Bryan Woo for. That's it, 2 games in a month's time. And Emerson Hancock can absolutely make 2 starts in replacement of Bryan Woo and keep the team very, very competitive. We saw him do it the whole first month of the year for the most part. We saw him come up and make a spot start just recently here. He is absolutely, Emerson Hancock's a big league starter. He just happens to be pitching in the minor leagues because the Mariners 5 and the rotation are so good. So he can absolutely come up and make 2 quality starts.
Yeah. So that part I'm not worried about. I wouldn't be a fan of them just using the off days as that 5th day and having everyone just keeping the 4 they have and go with an extra bullpen arm. I told you before, like when when Scott mentioned this as a possibility, don't really think that helps the Mariners' current starters. Like the only Mariners starter right now who probably doesn't need extra rest is Logan Gilbert. Everyone else, you could make a case. Like I think an extra day with those built-in off days would really benefit them. So to get Emerson up, it makes sense. There'd be a spot for him on the roster. Hopefully at that point your bullpen's not gassed and you don't need an extra arm. So yeah, you hope that. And you hope for the rest of the season that we can just get Bryan Woo 2 healthy months to end the year. Can we just get him 2 healthy months in a row, please?
Sure. Because then if you can do that and he pitches through the end of the regular season, come playoff time, put him right in the bullpen. And if he's right in the bullpen in the playoffs, that's a dominant arm to have out of the bullpen in the playoffs. If he had to make a start in the playoffs, it's possible. Bryce Miller might be in the bullpen too in the playoffs. They both might be because the Mariners might opt to go with a 3-man rotation come playoff time if they get in. So yeah, to get 2 healthy months out of Bryan Woo to end the year would be phenomenal.
Yeah, and his stuff was looking pretty good in Tampa Bay too, which is unfortunate. It would have been cool to see what he would have done if he would have kept going. The other injury news this week is Jorge Polanco is finally back, and not too shockingly, Tyler Locklear got sent down, and Ryan Bliss was kept on the roster. So how do we think the Mariners should balance this going forward? Should they split? Should Jorge Polanco get more playing time than Ryan Bliss? Like we've seen that Ryan Bliss will got some practice reps in the outfield during warmups and during early work, which is nice to see that he could be some right-handed production in the outfield if they need him to be. So how do you think they should split that up?
Jorge Polanco should be playing the majority of the time, at least for now. That's what he was traded here to be. That's what he's expected to be. It's easy to forget this is still one of the 5 best offensive second basemen in baseball over the last 3 years entering the start of this season. That player's in there. I know Jorge Polanco has not had the start that anybody wanted through the first basically half the year now. He spent a lot of time injured. But I don't think the Mariners are giving up on him this fast. So for now, at least for the next couple weeks, I think you're going to see Polanco play the majority of the time. You'll probably see Ryan Bliss get mixed in there against lefties some days and play once or twice a week. You'll see him come into games late. But like I don't know, I don't know exactly what their plan is with Bliss. I don't know if they value him more being in the minors and getting regular at-bats, or if they're okay with him being a utility infielder long-term who can also potentially stand out in left field. If that's the case, then Bliss will stay in the majors and just play when he's asked to play. But for now, I think you're going to see Polanco get the majority of the time. Because, again, for the Mariners to be the team they assembled this team to be before the start of the year, it involves Jorge Polanco being the second or third best bat in the lineup. So they're not going to give up on that yet.
I think they're going to want Ryan Bliss to get at-bats every day. I don't know exactly where that is. So I think over the short term, I think Bliss will play a bench role. But I don't know if it'll be anything beyond a couple of weeks. The Mariners are better with Ryan Bliss in the lineup and on the bench because he's fast, steals bases. He's been on a heater at the plate, and he plays good defense too, even though his arm strength's not great. So he checks all those boxes. But as you said, like Jorge Polanco has to play. He's not going to get back in a groove if he's not playing. If the Mariners decide to, because he's not playing well or hadn't played well before he got hurt, that he should be like splitting time with Ryan Bliss. But he's got to play every day, and he's going to get to play every day because the other core players of this lineup overall now in the course of the season, Garver's had a hot June, but Julio's been below league average WRC plus. So is JP Crawford. So is Cal Raleigh. So it's not like Jorge Polanco is alone on the struggle bus. If he was alone on the struggle bus, there could be a lot more justification of saying, okay, well, the rest of the lineup around Jorge Polanco is good. Let's put Ryan Bliss in there. It'll be easier for him to hit. There'll be less pressure on him. And, it's not as important that we have our second baseman be the best hitter in the lineup. Well, unfortunately right now, since no one else is hitting, it's almost one of the best courses of action that Jorge Polanco gets back to being a good offensive player. I do think it was interesting that game 1 of him being back on Monday, he hits in the 2-hole, has one bad game, and gets dropped all the way back down to the 6 hole.
Yeah. I don't know if they just didn't love what they saw in his first game back or realized maybe that's too much to ask of him right away coming back to hit him that high in the lineup and they want to acclimate him back in. Who knows? Like his first 2 games haven't looked great. He had 1 infield single here on Tuesday, but it was on a swinging bunt too. So that's about it. We're going to have to see how it plays out over the next few weeks here. But yeah, I think, look, the most important thing for him is he just needs to hit. I don't care if it's first, second, or ninth, wherever. Like, put him where you think he's going to be best suited to have success. And if he starts hitting, worry about it later.
It's my turn.
Yes.
No. He will have a leash to get back in his groove. But I thought there have been some good points made about this now that we've seen what Bliss can do over a short sample size and what Polanco can do as well. If we're picking who does what better, so Jorge Polanco's a better hitter than Ryan Bliss right now. He's not. Is he a better base runner? No. Better defender?
No.
You switch hits, so he has that. Positional versatility.
I guess it's Bliss, yeah. Because Polanco can play third. He hasn't played any third this year.
Right. So we have the bat for 1 and the rest of it with Ryan Bliss. Mm-hmm. So that's why the leash will not be infinite. If they really if it burns out sometime later, then sure, it would be more Ryan Bliss. I would say, though, odds are Ryan Bliss will see some more time in Tacoma before that opportunity happens, I would say. I have a hard time seeing him being on the bench that long, or the decision being made with Polanco, given he's healthy, that short for Bliss to not go down and then be inserted to play every day at second base.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's right. Ultimately, I'm happy Jorge Polanco's back because it gives the Mariners the opportunity to get a real bat back end of this lineup. You saw him absolutely crush the ball during his rehab assignment. Hopefully this hamstring stuff is fully behind him and he can get going. I know the first couple games haven't looked great, but it is also 2 games. Let's give it a couple weeks and then reevaluate. That's my take. So, yeah. Before we get to our next storyline, let's take a pause. We're going to talk to you guys about our friends at Pagacci's Pub 85. If you want to get out and watch the Mariners, you want to just go have a day with your friends, an evening out with your friends, you can head over there. There's great drinks, there's great food, there's games to play, there's darts, and there's pool, and there's all the sports you can imagine to watch, because there's over 20 TVs in that place. You go during happy hour, drink specials are $3 and $4. 2 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, $3 and $4 drinks. Those are pretty good deals, if we say so ourselves. So, get out and get over to Pagacci's Pub 85 over in Kirkland. Storyline number 2. It's funny that this has gotten buried to the point that it's at right now in time of recording of the podcast, because this is probably the biggest story in Mariners world right now, aside from the fact that they have had a pretty tough road trip, which is, what in the hell is going on with these home road splits, especially on the pitching side?
Well, I'm coming to the conclusion that this might not be a good road pitching staff.
Mm-hmm.
Not good. Period. This is a staff that we've tabbed at times as the best staff in baseball, but I'm not even sure they're good away from T-Mobile Park. Legitimately. I'm not. There are some very concerning things when we're talking about the splits between how the Mariners pitch in their home park at T-Mobile Park and how they pitch away from it. And given they still pitch in good pitchers' parks on the road and yet are not successful. Why is that? So let's paint the background picture for those of you not aware of the home road differences. They pitched about the same amount of innings at home and on the road. At home, they have a 2.54 ERA. They've given up 33 homers, and they've given up a 5.56 OPS against. On the road, the ERA is at 4.49. They've given up 19 more home runs, and this was, by the way, before today, and a 7.18 OPS against. The whip is a third of a number higher. Whip, walks and hits per inning pitch. The strikeouts are way up at home, and the walks are way up on the road. Simply put, they are the best pitching staff in baseball at home, and they are a mediocre pitching staff on the road. That's what that is, Lyle. That's what the first half of this 2024 season has told us. But why? It's the same pitchers, it's the same stuff, and yet away from home, it is not good.
So I'm going to be totally honest, and we get into this with Gary Hill a little bit too in our in our conversation with him. I don't know if there is a quantifiable reason you can put your finger on. If you just want to look at what the Mariners have done home versus road the last 2 years, a season ago, they had a team ERA pitching-wise of 3.42 at home, and it was 4.07 on the road. So yes, they were better in T-Mobile Park. It was certainly not as drastic as it is right now. 2022, 3.26 team ERA at home. So not quite the performance they're putting up in 2024 where it's been magnificent. But it was also a 3.94 team ERA on the road. So this is not a regular annual occurrence where the Mariners just happen to be all worldly inside of T-Mobile Park and a below average staff when they go on the road. No, this is significant to this season. And it has never been this drastic before. And what is the reason behind it? Look, we can try and pinpoint a couple things here, but I'm not sure if it goes anything beyond you're going to be left guessing. Is it because the crowd pumps them up so much at home? Is it because obviously the conditions are a little bit more suitable for pitchers at home? A little bit. Again, it is the friendliest pitcher park in baseball, T-Mobile Park. But is it a comfortability thing where they just have their routine of being in Seattle? Like, I don't know, because the split should not be this drastic. But like the one that stands out the most here, before I let you try to pinpoint some reasons why it might be happening, because I know you have a theory or two. But like I just keep looking at Bryce Miller, and he's not the only one with some drastic splits home and road this year. Like George Kirby has some decently drastic splits. Luis Castillo's splits are now pretty drastic, especially after the start here on Tuesday. But Bryce Miller, man, I mean, you're talking about a 1.82 ERA at home this year and a 6.28 ERA on the road. I don't know. Like, is that just going to level itself out? I have no idea, because that is drastic.
How is it possible for a pitching staff to have a whiff rate at home that is first in baseball? First. Do you want to guess where they are on the road?
22nd.
4th. 24th.
Oh, 24th. I thought you were about to tell me they were 4th.
No. So how is it the pitchers that throw the same pitches at home and on the road have a drop-off of 24 spots?
So there is an article out there on Pitcher List, which we would encourage anybody to read if you haven't, and they detail a lot of what the numbers look like in 2023 in terms of pitching in T-Mobile versus pitching outside of T-Mobile. And along with T-Mobile Park being a very friendly pitcher's park and a pitcher's environment, it's also a strikeout environment, because you look at the whiff numbers, home versus road, especially last year, and they are a little bit more favorable in Seattle. A little bit. But it's not 1st to 24th, I can tell you that.
Yeah. What's interesting about that article, I'm going to get into that here in a second, and paint a little bit of background on why this article is so important. So T-Mobile Park, for example, if you weren't aware, StatCast has a way they measure ballpark run environments called Park Factor. And Park Factor it's like a 3-year rolling average of offensive production in a ballpark. 100 is average, higher is better, lower is worse. The Mariners are at 92. That is far and away the worst hitter's environment. The next closest is Citi Field, that's at 95. 3 percentage points in something like this is pretty drastic, especially below 100 if you take a look at those teams that are below the 100 level. It is the worst ballpark for quality for WOBA on contact, which is called WOBAcon. It looks like bacon, but it's actually how much damage are the balls you're putting in play doing. And that's what that represents, and T-Mobile Park is the worst in baseball at that. It is at or near the bottom in all of singles, doubles, and triples individually on offensive production. Shockingly, though, the thing that comes up the most, Lyle, about T-Mobile Park is that the ball doesn't carry. T-Mobile Park over the last 3 seasons is 11th in baseball in home runs. Or, sorry, not 11th, middle of the pack in home runs. Mariners are 11th in homers this season. But T-Mobile Park, a park that does not, allegedly, does not let fly balls fly out of the ballpark, is middle of the pack in baseball in home runs. So that doesn't make much sense. So you're telling me they say the balls get knocked down in the thick air, but the balls that you hit more in a line drive actually don't do anything. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But also, here's the most important one. It's the strikeouts. T-Mobile Park over the last 3 seasons has been the best park in baseball for pitcher strikeouts on both sides. Yes, you can make a joke that the Mariners, no shit, TJ, the Mariners strike out a lot. Of course, the park factor is going to say T-Mobile Park has the best strikeout factor. And, that could be an okay point. But it's not everything, because the Mariners don't take every at-bat at T-Mobile Park. So here's what I think this pitcher list article tries to highlight. It highlights that the impact that T-Mobile Park has specifically is fastballs. That's what it has the most effect on. Saying that the difference of home versus road, like whiff rates, contact rates on fastballs, is drastic. And it's enough to say that that could be a reason, right? It's more than breaking balls. It's more than off-speed pitches. It is fastballs at T-Mobile Park that do the most damage. I have one more thing to add, but I'll let you respond to that first. What you think?
Well, even if fastballs play up that much more in Seattle than anywhere else, I still don't think that answers the question of why it is so drastic in terms of the differences between home and road. That should factor into it a little bit. But to be as drastic of a pitching staff this year at home versus on the road, again, I'll go back to this. I don't think there is a quantifiable answer here. I really don't. If you want to look at the strikeouts, we're going to use 2023 data here because this is what the article used. And last year, looking at the rotation, Bryan Wu had almost a 10% difference between strikeout rate at home and on the road. Luis Castillo and George Kirby were a little over 7% in terms of difference. So there were some differences there in terms of home versus road strikeout rate. And those guys, I would say Castillo and Wu especially, sure, rely on strikeouts. But to the point where Luis Castillo, entering his start today, had a 4.34 road ERA compared to a 2.9 at home, and now after another tough outing here in Tampa, it's probably going to get closer to 5. The fact that fastballs are more effective at T-Mobile Park doesn't answer enough of the question of how it's this drastic.
But the Mariners are a primary fastball team. That's why they're so good. They attack the strike zone with velocity. That's what they've tried to preach.
But this is the same rotation that they had a year ago. And the splits weren't this drastic last year. Wasn't this drastic 2 years ago?
It is a different offensive environment this year. We've articulated that, how offense is down, and perhaps it plays up a little bit. So I have some numbers this year. I went and I did a little bit of digging myself. And it backs up what Adam, who wrote this pitcher list article, found when he was looking at 2023, and I think he looked at 22 and 21 as well when he's trying to find some of those whiff rates. But I found as well, Lyle, looking at the Mariners pitching staff as a whole, you would assume, based on the reputation of Mariners pitching, that their off-speed and breaking balls would be held in pretty high regard no matter where they play, right?
Sure, yeah.
When you go onto Baseball Savant, you try and find some results-based numbers on how the Mariners' off-speed pitches have performed this year. I looked at 2 numbers. I looked at expected xWOBA, which is quality of contact. What's the quality of contact against that pitch? Higher is lower, lower is better. Or higher is worse, lower is better. The average is, I think, about 310. And then I looked at whiff rate as well. Do you realize those pitches, their off-speed pitches and breaking balls, were middle of the pack at home? And then on the road, they got a lot worse. So into the bottom 30% of baseball in terms of effectiveness on those two stats. So that's that. But when you look at fastballs, wow, the Mariners this year have the best fastball whiff rate by far and the best quality of contact against their fastballs at home. Then when they go on the road, it turns into a middle-of-the-road pitch. So let me summarize this. So when the Mariners are at home this year, they pair middle-of-the-pack breaking stuff over as an entire staff. You could probably nitpick with more specific guys, but overall, you take the best fastballs based on quality of contact and strikeout rate in baseball, and you pair it with good breaking stuff. But then when you go on the road, you have a middle-of-the-road fastball effectiveness, and you pair it with bottom 30% off speed and breaking pitches. And that right there, that doesn't signal best staff in baseball. And then we stop. You almost get to the point where you're like, oh, well, that makes sense. So maybe there aren't actually that good on the road. Like the results say they're not that good on the road, but the numbers also represent, yeah, they might just not be good pitchers on the road, period, when we're sitting here expecting them to be good.
It's still just fascinating. It's fascinating that changing states and hopping on a plane to go anywhere else is tanking their ERAs on the road. Because it's not going to Cincinnati and that's tanking their ERAs, or going to the old Texas ballpark, which was a hitter's park, or going to Colorado constantly. They play in pitchers' parks. That's why this is so puzzling to me. Because look, Seattle is the friendliest pitchers' park, but it's not like they play in no other pitchers' parks. Yet it doesn't seem to matter where they go this year, and it's killing them. And if you want to go back to the strikeout rate thing, if you want to make the argument of, okay, Castillo and Wu are two pitchers that rely a lot on strikeout rate. And the fact that their strikeout rate, at least last year, took a decent jump down when they go on the road, maybe it affected them a little bit. Okay, but I'll say it again. Last year, their road ERA wasn't like that. Look at George Kirby. Kirby doesn't rely on strikeouts. This is another guy that's got drastic home road splits despite not relying on the strikeout. And it doesn't seem to matter what park they go to. It's affecting him everywhere. I don't know.
And there's stuff mentioned in this article about the batter's eye, and the batter's eye could absolutely be contributing. We've talked more about the T-Mobile Park batter's eye in the last 2 weeks than I ever imagined when we started this podcast we'd be talking about. But yeah, we've been talking about this. Article brings up, the slanted nature of the batter's eye, and one of the many reasons could be that fastballs on that batter's eye just look different than they do anywhere else. It is possible that specific pitch could look different than it does anywhere else. Yeah. A right-handed, because the Mariners will use the majority of their innings in the rotation as the sample there, mostly all right-handed pitchers, that a right-handed throwing fastball is the worst combination to have when looking at that batter's eye and what it does to pitches.
Yeah, it could be. Well, I hadn't even given it that much thought until we hopped on Trevor May's podcast, Mayday, with him a couple weeks ago, and he started to bring it up and say, I think this is a real thing. He said he's talked about it with a few different people, and they think it's affected guys. And again, I hadn't given it too much thought, and then we started to give it more thought, and the fact that, yeah, it is a unique batter's eye. It is unique in the way that it's pushed decently far back. It's not right up against the wall. It's slanted. It's different than a lot of ballparks, and maybe it really does affect hitters. Maybe it affected Teoscar Hernandez last year when he was in Seattle. And to that point, maybe it makes it that much harder for road hitters to pick up Seattle pitchers at home. Maybe that's a real thing. We don't know that, but it could be.
Here's what my conclusion will be from this, is that I have a hard time seeing the Mariners winning the division if these road struggles keep up. If the drop-off continues to be this drastic, they're not winning the division. You only get half your games at home. You got to go at least compete on the road. And some of these recent results on the road have just not been good enough.
Right. And you look at your rotation, I'll say it again. Bryce Miller's ERA on the road is over 6. Luis Castillo's ERA on the road is probably going to be close to 5 when it all updates on Wednesday morning. George Kirby is going to enter his start on Wednesday with a 4.41 road ERA. Those are 3 guys in the rotation that have very, very unfavoring road numbers this year. And you cannot roll into road series with your starters just being non-competitive on the road. It's just not going to work, because there's series where all 3 of those guys may need to pitch all at once, and all 3 of them can't just blow up and the Mariners have success. It's just not going to work. It's going to have to turn around.
And based on how this is going, we've talked, can the Mariners just get into the playoffs with this rotation? Just get into the playoffs with this rotation? No, they need to go get into the playoffs and play at home with this rotation. That's where the difference is right now. Things could change in the second half, but as of right now, the only way this rotation does what we thought it would at the beginning of the season in a playoff series is if they're playing those games at home. And if you don't win the division, it is really hard to get a home a home series.
Yeah, it is. And it affected the Mariners in 2022 when they made the playoffs. They didn't have a home series. They might have won in Toronto, but that Houston series could have looked a lot different if they had more games in Seattle. I'll tell you that, especially if the first two were in Seattle. So.
I enjoyed Gary Hill's perspective on this. So we lead off the interview talking to Gary a little bit about food. I'm not gonna lie, but we also talked about this specific issue. And Gary brings up a good point, different from what we just talked about. It was less about number specific and more about execution and such. So that was part of the conversation with Gary Hill. But it's good to get to catch up with Gary and get his perspective on the Mariners roster. Talked a little bit about Julio. Talked a little bit about the Mariners trade deadline upcoming. Gary's great. He's a friend of the pod now, recurring guest. Awesome to get him back on. A+ human being. And overall, a very good conversation to have with Gary Hill.
It always is. He's an A+ everything. He's an A+ broadcaster. I know we didn't talk that much nitty-gritty broadcasting with Gary on this interview, but he really is a phenomenal broadcaster. And aside from that, like, he's knowledgeable. You know, he thinks about baseball the way the two of us and a lot of our listeners think about it. He's very tuned in on all of the metrics and all of the numbers. So yeah, and above everything else, great dude and always fun to talk to. You will get smarter listening to Gary Hill talk baseball. So hopefully you do that here.
Let's get you now to that conversation with Gary Hill Jr. All right, we've got Mariners broadcaster Gary Hill Jr. on with us all the way from South Florida, recording here on Tuesday. Gary, thanks so much for taking some time to join us. Just want to check in on something that we ended our last interview with you last year. How's that? Oh, do we have an update on the food tour?
The food tour is going great. Aaron and I went to a good place when we first got in, right across the street here. I would say the food tour is going great for Aaron. I just tag along, and it's worked out fine. It works out great for me. He does all the work. He figures out where to go, and I just go. So it's perfect.
But you still get to enjoy it. You still get to check some boxes and say, "Well, I didn't know of that before. Now I do."
No, I think I have it the best because I literally don't do anything. He figures it all out, where to go, and I just tag along and eat good food. So I think I have it the best, actually.
So what's the story I heard the other night about $9 fried chicken in Miami?
So, we actually don't get a lot of dinners on the road because usually it's night games. And if it's a day game, it's usually a getaway day. So we don't get that many opportunities to actually have dinner on the road. And in Miami, we did. And Aaron ended up ordering, I think, 4 different proteins during the meal. But we're looking at the menu and it's like, man, this fried chicken's $9. How do we not order this? And so we did, because I think he ordered crab, he ordered chicken, cornbread. I mean, there's like 9 things. I don't think the table was big enough, which happens sometimes. Sometimes we need just another table for the two of us. It was epic. It was an epic night. But
that sounds like
$9. You got to do it. So we did.
That sounds like this is reminiscing of. I scrolled past a tweet last night that was like reminiscing on Max Scherzer going down to the minor leagues and just buying a spread for the minor leaguers with like steak and lobster. That's essentially what it sounds like Goldie did. Yeah. So I think it's partially, if I'm going to guess here, partially because he likes eating and likes eating a lot of different things, but also wants to make sure you're well fed as well, Gary, because he scouted this all out.
Yeah, he keeps me alive on the road. So that's what's nice. If I was up to my own devices, I'm not sure I'd make it, especially on a long trip like this. So he's influential in that.
If we were going to get into a little bit of baseball talk here, Gary, I mean, as we're recording this, road trip's getting pretty close to wrapping up. There's 2 games left to go. For people that need to hear it, because especially from what we see, I'm sure you see a little bit of it too. It seems like people need the following a little bit right now. You want to talk people off the ledge a little bit for why everything's going to be all right?
Oh, okay. I can do that. Well, first of all, you would rather be in the Mariners' position than anyone else's position, right? In the division. The Mariners have been on the other end of this thing the last 3 years, being the team that is chasing Texas and chasing Houston, it's a much different situation to be the team being chased. So let's just start right there. That's a better place to be in. And while they were up 10 games, and while we would have loved if they would have just put the foot on the gas and made it an 18-game lead or whatever, I don't know how realistic that was, because I still feel like Houston's a good team, and I still feel like Texas is a good team. So it's hard to imagine they just would have floated away. It did open my eyes. You know, Houston got in a soft part of the schedule where they took series from the Angels and the Tigers and the White Sox. The Baltimore sweep did really open some eyes, because not only did it close the gap because the Mariners are struggling, they did it without Tucker too. And they did it after Baltimore steamrolled the Yankees. So I thought that was really impressive. Houston, to me, is not dead until they are. So they're just going to be a team that's going to be right there. And for the Mariners, you know, it's the thing where they've been great at home, historically good at home. Their pitching has been, they have the best team ERA they've ever had at home. They are allowing the lowest batting average, the lowest on base percentage in history at home, and not the Mariners' history. I'm talking about like the last 100 years of baseball history. And so it becomes a math equation. Like when you're looking at the difference between, they've been one of the best home teams in baseball and they're under 500 on the road. The difference is they're giving up 2 more runs on the road. Their ERA is 2 runs higher on the road than it is at home. So those close wins at home are turning into close losses on the road. That doesn't have to continue for the rest of the year, right? I mean, the offense can get better. They can get better in the back of the bullpen. I think for the most part, they've done a good job in the bullpen trying to manage a really difficult situation, because they had a big 4 coming into the season, and it's been a big 1 instead with Munoz, because you haven't had Spire hurt most of the year. You haven't had Brash at all. You haven't had Santos at all. So maybe Santos gets back. Maybe you add to the mix, and that situation becomes different than it is right now. And as much as we've talked about the trade deadline, like I really feel like the key is for the offense to get better internally. And there's a lot of different guys that are going to be a part of that. And Julio is going to be a big part of that too, I think, especially on the power side. So while this has not been a great road trip, and it hasn't been fun to watch the lead kind of whittle away that was 10 games, you still, if you would have said on June 25th, they would have had this lead in the AL West right now, you would have taken that in a heartbeat. And you just hope they get better on the road and can extend this thing out, and Houston and Texas not track them down. So that's kind of how I look at it. And I know it can be hard to look at it that way, especially in the moment, especially on a trip like this when things are struggling. But hey, for all we know, the Mariners are going to take the next couple of games in Tampa and come home and have a great homestand again. So we'll see what happens.
You noted the drastic home road splits. Do you have any semblance of, especially pitching wise, do you have any semblance of why that is? I mean, I'm trying to look at it and trying to figure out how, like, T-Mobile Park's a really good pitcher's park. Like, but it's not like they're going to places that are the absolute antithesis of T-Mobile Park. Like, no, there's still better pitching parks that they'll go to on the road, but still not perform as well. So it's kind of like a puzzle. Do you have any answer on what the piece might be of why that is?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been looking at this for a while, trying to figure out exactly what's going on. I don't think there is one answer, and I think there is some mystery there to what's going on. I think the park is part of it. I don't think the park explains the drastic difference, because there are some wide differences. And the ERA, as I mentioned, it's 2.5 at home. It's over 4.5 on the road. That's a big gulf. And there's 2 things I look at that I find interesting when you kind of look at the numbers. One is they're just giving up a lot more home runs on the road. And again, Park's probably part of that. It's definitely not all of that, though, because it's a wide gulf. It's like 20 plus home runs more on the road than they've given up at home. And right now the games are pretty equal. So we're talking about, I think they played 2 more road games than they have home games. So the numbers are pretty equal when you look at it. One of the things that I find super fascinating is they strike out nearly 100 more hitters at home on the road so far, just raw numbers. So their Ks per 9 is like 9.5 at home and like 7.5 on the road. So that's the kind of thing when you talk about Park, it's like, well, the Park can't explain strikeouts, right? So what is going on here? How can the strikeouts be that difference? Because there's some things you can explain home runs and maybe ERA, but when it got to strikeouts, I was scratching my head. We asked Scott Service this the other day, and he feels like they are not getting into the same advantageous counts at home as they are on the road. And you look at the numbers, there's a big difference between an 0-1 count and a 1-0 count and how an at-bat plays out, or a 1-2 count and a 2-1 count. So that is probably part of it. Park is probably part of it. I don't know. There's probably some other things at play here, but I do think there's still some mystery there and some unexplainable things, and maybe schedule's part of it too. You look at some of the road teams coming up, and they have a chance to do some damage on the road, although you could have said it about Miami, and they didn't in Miami. So I don't know. I'm curious to see if this evens out a little bit, but it's weird how it's played out in this way. And the strikeouts thing, I don't know. I can't explain it fully.
And you sometimes want to use the Mariners' offense as well to try and find an answer, because they also have to play both the same amount of games in that park and the same amount of games away from that park, but the numbers aren't the same. It's a little bit different on the road, but it's pretty similar. It's not. It's almost as if the Mariners, I feel like, have built the right kind of pitching staff for T-Mobile Park that just might not work anywhere else, and no one else really replicates what the Mariners do pitching wise on the road. That would be my best guess of what this is.
So I would say, yeah, if the Mariners pitching staff works great at home, obviously, and you're right about the offensive numbers. There are some differences. Like they're slugging, I think, 20 points higher on the road. So, that is different, but it's not the same difference as the pitching side, if that makes sense. They don't equal out. I would say the rotation plays no matter where you are. Although, Bryce Miller is kind of an example of individually of the team, right? Like his splits are pretty vast now between what's happening at home and what's happening on the road. And we are talking about, for a starter, I don't know, it's not a huge sample. You get lit up in a couple of road starts, that changes everything dramatically. So I don't know if we can draw conclusions as Bryce Miller doesn't pitch well on the road. Like, I don't know if it's fair to make a statement like that, but it is interesting. I do think their rotation plays anywhere. I think Munoz plays anywhere. And I don't know, I just go around and around on this trying to figure it out sometimes. It's really tricky to think about. And, maybe it's just one of those things that in the second half of the season, they go on a road run. I don't know. I guess we'll see.
I guess, I think the three of us are similar thinkers when it comes to baseball a lot of the time, that we like to look into the stuff and dig deep into some of the numbers. But the best takeaway I've had from this so far is, I don't know, maybe it's a comfortability thing. Maybe it's a playing in front of the home crowd thing, and you can't quantify that. But because anybody can't seem to figure out any of the numbers of why this is happening, that might be my best guess at this point.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I said originally. Like, maybe there's a bunch of different factors at play, and maybe that's part of it too. I mean, we know play on the road is harder. Like, I would not expect them to have as good a record on the road as they do at home. It's just, I would not expect the gulf to be this wide. So I would like to think they'll get better on the road as we go. But for me, right now it's become a simple math equation. Like, they're giving up those 2 more runs on the road. And when you're playing so many close games, those close wins at home are close losses on the road. So it points to, like, the first game at Tampa is a great example. They had a 3-1 lead, but it's tough when you're asking your bullpen to pitch on such a small margin for error every single night. And I just feel like you're more likely to lose those games on the road than you are at home, too. I think that's part of it. Like, in a 1-run game, 2-run game, you're probably more likely to lose that game on the road than you are at home. So maybe that's some of it, too.
I want to ask about Julio. We could sit here and talk about his numbers all we want. It's pretty evident. It's out there in front. But I want to ask you about what people don't get to see with Julio. As he's here in year 3, still just 23 years old. How have you felt like, he's handled everything else besides what happens when the lights are on and the games are being played this season? Like, where is he at with that?
I think he handles it great because he's got a lot of pressure on him, as we know. And I think he puts in the work. There's no question about that. He's been a great teammate. He's been a really valuable player when you look at him as a whole. Like defensively in center field, he's been excellent. He's done some good things offensively. It's just we always look at Julio through the lens of expectations, right? Because everyone has really high expectations for Julio. And part of that has been who he's been so far in his career, right? He's been great. And so I think all of us, even when he started slowly, we expected the great surge to come at some point, and it hasn't. And it really, I think we're talking about power specifically. Like he has done some batting average wise, some things like that. The exit velo has been there. We're just talking about pulling balls in the air for homers. And that's been the difference, I think. Because if you add that to the mix, like everything else in my mind has been there. Base paths, defense, all that, all of the greatness that makes Julio great has all been there, except the pull power for home runs. And as we've seen, I'm still waiting for the binge to happen because we've seen it happen. We've seen it click, and we've seen it click just out of the blue. And when he goes. He can go on a 2-week, 3-week, 1-month stretch where he's just the best player in baseball because we've seen it multiple times. So, and it's the fact of the matter is he changes the offense when he's like that. And he's really the only guy like that can carry the offense for a sustained period of time. He's a huge difference maker. And I do feel like he wants to be great. He wants the team to be great. He wants to win. And I think he puts that pressure on himself sometimes, which it comes from a good place. Like we all love that about Julio, right? Like we all love he wants to be great and he wants to win. It's just sometimes I think you can see in it at bats when he puts the pressure on himself and tries to do a little too much.
Speaking of the offense, I want to talk about somebody in a little bit more of like a positive light here because Mitch Garver's had a phenomenal June. And we talked about a lot before the start of the year that not named Julio Rodriguez, he was the most important bat in this lineup. I still feel that way. And now seeing what he's doing in June, and now that he's really gotten going, like, do you feel like we're starting to see some of that?
Yes. I feel like he has been the guy they were hoping to have this year because he's been an on-base machine and he's been slugging. And that's Mitch Garver. That's it right there. I think it's so funny that coincided with him starting to catch too, which is super interesting. But yeah, and that's part of me when I think about this offense and getting better. Like if Julio does go on a run, if Mitch Garver is this, maybe Polanco can be better too. Like you can map out a scenario where they can get better offensively. And they don't have to be a top 5 offense. We're talking about their margins have been so small at home and road. And on the road, you're asking for just like score another run or two, right? Consistently. Like most nights when they get to 4 runs, they're going to win. That's not a top 5 offense. That's a top half offense or mid-tier offense. That's what we're asking for. So I think you can look at different parts and different pieces of the offense and say and map out internally how they do that. And Garver is certainly a big part of that.
Do you feel like, in your conversations with him, do you feel like it's been a different adjustment for him this year? He's always been a fastball hitter, but this year the production, especially against breaking balls, has disappeared. It has been almost non-existent, and yet despite something pitchers throw 30% of the time, is that he can't do any damage against, he's still managing to turn it around and produce. Do you get that sense from him that it's different this year, but I've still found a way around it?
Yeah, he is really interesting to talk hitting with. And he's a guy that's, I don't know if tinkerer is the right way to phrase it, but he's always changing and adjusting. And you're right, he has absolutely mashed fastballs the last number of years. He's made his living on mashing fastballs. That's where the vast majority of production comes from. Now, the golf this year has been really wide, as you point out. And I think, I don't know. Talking to him about hitting and how he looks at it, I just, in a lot of ways, he has been an example of what the Mariners have been, especially with the spin. Like the Mariners overall have struggled with spin this year. And as you point out, Garver has struggled with spin this year. But he's a guy that has done a lot of adjusting in his career and adjusted well in his career. And I expect him to do the same. Now, I don't think his production on spin will match his heater production, because that's where he's made his money, bashing fastballs. But I think he'll be better.
If we're gonna keep talking offense here, and I'm with all of that, they keep Ryan Bliss around. The Mariners keep Ryan Bliss here this week. They send Locklear back with Polanco coming back. We even saw some reports this week that he started to take a little bit of time and take some reps in left field here, or in the outfield, I should say. But with how hot he's now started to get over this road trip, paired with the fact of what he can do, not just on the at the plate, but on the base paths, like, what does he do for this team, keeping him around now? Like, can he play that Jose Caballero role?
That's a great question. I'm curious to see how long this lasts, because at some point you do want him to play, and you don't want him to, it's the reason why they brought in Robles and sent Class A down, because Robles slid into the exact role Class A was playing, right? Kind of the, hey, you're going to start against lefties, defensive replacement, pinch run, that kind of role. Because the problem is, with a 21-year-old, you don't want him in that role, because you don't want him to not start for 5 days in a row, 6 days in a row, something like that. So that's why they sent Locklear out, because there was no path to playing time for Locklear. When you have a DH and first baseman, that's where Locklear plays. There's nowhere to go. So with Bliss, he does more for you, because he can pinch run late in a ball game and help you there. He can play second base. He can play shortstop if needed. The outfield thing is interesting. And I don't think it's like, hey, Ryan Bliss is going to start in left field. I think it's Bliss could pinch run late in a ball game and stand in left field for an inning or two and catch a fly ball if there's one hit to him if needed. It's that sort of thing. I don't look at it as kind of a position switch or anything like that. But I wonder, like, if Polanco starts to cook offensively, right? He's going to play. He's going to play every day. And then you have Dylan Moore you're trying to fit in as well. So I do wonder, if those guys start to hit, is there a path for playing time for Bliss? And I know this is the way it is now. We'll see how it is in the next week or so. And if Polanco doesn't hit, maybe that opens the door back for Bliss to get some more playing time against lefties, and maybe even more. And now Bliss he's had a really nice road trip, a couple of really great games against the Marlins. So it's great to see. He's shown, he's been interesting. He's been intriguing, I think, overall. But we'll see how it plays out the next couple of weeks. And I think a lot of it hinges on the production from Polanco, to be honest.
So you mentioned Polanco. Is him turning it around right now at this point the most important thing for the offense? Let's throw Julio out, because that's I think a number one in every sense of the way. Garver's hitting, and we've talked about Bliss's very good production here over the last few weeks. Okay, outside of those guys, is it Polanco who keys this offensive turnaround? Is it J.P. Crawford? Is it Ty France getting back to what he was doing before he went on the injured list? Which of those guys do you think it would be? Or
that it's a really great question. And it's so funny, as you go down the list, you can say yes, yes, yes. I mean, part of it is, and I will get back to the original question. Part of it is they need to get better in multiple spots, right? Like JP, you'd love to see him. I think it's too much to ask him to be at the level he was last year, because for all we know, that could be a career year. He was great last year, but can he get closer to that compared to this year? Can Cal be more consistent offensively this year? You get a little more of that. Can Julio get better, hit for more power? I just think you've got to get better in several different areas. But if I had to key on one guy, to me it is Polanco. Part of it is who he's been in the past. Also, I don't know, the way I think about this lineup right now, and I thought it was really interesting, he batted second last night. It would add a lot of balance to the lineup if you could get Polanco producing and also producing from the second spot in the order. Because they've ridden Rojas and Moore in those spots when they've had the hot hand. Now, what does the next version of this lineup look like? And maybe, hopefully, fingers crossed, it could be Polanco in that spot. Because if you're going to bat Julio third, you know what I mean? There's some interesting lineup questions that I think get answered if Polanco's the guy you're hoping he'd be.
Could it just be as simple as finding a productive two-hitter? Like you mentioned riding the hot hand, but the hot hands haven't lasted forever, and the amount of rotation out of that number 2 spot hitting behind JP it's been pretty decent. I think they wanted Polanco to hit second or third when they traded for him, but he spent all this time on the injured list. Julio spent time in the 2-hole, but got moved down and now sits in the 3-hole. And they haven't really tried like someone like Ty France in the 2-hole. They haven't tried. Cal's not really a 2-hole hitter, and he's of course struggled over the last month. So, like the 2-hitter could be the key, right? And it could ultimately just be Polanco to fix that all out. So, like that's where it comes with like the multiple spots. Right, like the multiple spots. The 2-hole hitting behind the guy who walks a lot, you get more power out of your 3-hole, and then you get a little bit more consistency on your home run hitters, Cal hitting 4th or 5th or wherever it is, and then whoever else hits behind.
Yeah, I like the way you phrased that, because generally I'm not a huge lineup construction guy. In a general sense, I just want your best hitters at the top of the order. If a guy's batting second or third, whatever, it's a flip of the coin generally. But I do feel like there's been something about the 2-hole this year for the Mariners for all the reasons that you just pointed out. And if they could find some consistency there, and I'm a believer, like we see teams put their best hitter in the 2-hole a lot these days. And I think there's a reason for it. And I think there's a lot of numbers will tell you that's a good thing to do. But the Mariners just haven't found consistency there. I mean, Rojas was good there for a while, and Moore was good there for a while, obviously, but Julio never caught fire there. You said it all. So it would solve so many things if Polanco could be that guy in that spot, I think. And then it feels like you'd have something to build around at the top of the lineup too.
If we're going to talk trade deadline here for a minute, because it seems to be the topic that everybody loves to talk about here, if you had to identify, it doesn't even have to be a specific player, but I'll say a specific player or a specific area of need that you think the Mariners would benefit from acquiring at the deadline, what is it?
Well, this part of the question is easy, I think. I think we can all identify what they could use. They could use another bat. I think they could use another arm in the back end of the bullpen. Maybe they need a couple of bats, and maybe this is the question. I think when you start to get into specifics, like, do you feel like they would be better off landing a star? Do you feel like they'd be better off landing 2 second-tier kind of bats? So this is the problem I always have with trade deadlines is, like, you could come at me with a list of like 20 dudes and say, hey, what do you think of them? And I'd say, yes, yes, yes. I mean, I could come up with 100 guys that would help the Mariners right now. I think what's difficult about the trade deadline, and specifically about this trade deadline, is, okay, who's actually available and what are they actually going to cost? And the reason I have a hard time talking about the trade deadline is I feel like I'm generally pretty informed on what goes on with the Mariners and around the Mariners. The trade deadline I find to be the most difficult because a lot of times, sometimes I find out, sometimes we don't. It's hard to know exactly what teams are asking for and exactly who is available, because some of the names we see out in the world aren't actually available, and we never find that out. Let's just Luis Robert as an example. Like, I think about this, and I think it's helpful to sometimes look at this from the other team's perspective. Like, if you're the White Sox and you're trading Robert, this is your biggest trade piece. You are kicking off your rebuild. You've got to nail this. And you are going to ask for the moon. And you're not in a position where you have to trade him because he's under contract for essentially 3 more years. So from that perspective, like, what are you willing to give up for a guy like that? And just about every guy in the market that we're talking about, like, there's no 100% certainty with every guy we're talking about, right? Like, all the names you see out there, there's not a lot of certainty. And there's not a lot of guys, especially when every team in the National League is actually in the wild card race. And I mean that literally, outside of the Marlins and Rockies. Like, every team is in the mix. And if it stays like this, what is the deadline going to look like? Like, how many guys will even be available in terms of bats? That's what I'm most concerned about from a buyer's perspective. Who are we talking about here? Because you look at the Marlins and Rockies and teams that are Angels, teams that are like out of it. And sure, there are some players that will help, but there's fewer players than teams that need help. That's the concern. Because I do think you can't sell out your future. You can be aggressive, but you can't in good conscience give away everyone you have, because you do have to think about the future as well.
Yeah, and like, so on that note, right, there's essentially 5 teams right now that will be sellers at the deadline, and 2 of them do happen to be in your own division. And like, so here's an example. We've thrown out Brent Rooker a decent amount just because, like, to the point of what you talked about the people we see out in the world that we think could be available. And also, to your point, there's no player on this market that's a perfect player, but just in terms of he has power, he can play the outfield, right-handed bat, probably going to be an all-star for the 2nd consecutive year. But 1, do the Mariners put up with his strikeouts? Number 2, would the A's trade him in their own division? Like, I heard Ryan Divish just a few days ago talking about how a couple of years ago the Mariners really wanted Matt Chapman. They offered a decent package for him, but the A's said, we don't want to trade him to Seattle. So, like, to your point, yeah, it's gonna be a tough market to navigate, I think, if you're the Mariners or a lot of teams at this deadline.
Yeah, in-division trades are tricky. Like, you don't see that a lot at the deadline. And you can, there's probably a couple guys on the Angels that are intriguing, but are we going to see in-division trades? Because if you're trading a guy away, especially a guy that's going to be under contract, and everything else is even, like, you'd rather not face them 13 times a year or whatever in your own division. So I think that's part of it.
Sure.
Yeah. I am super fascinated to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
And the other question I think people are dying to know about this trade deadline is this the deadline the Mariners finally go away from the we need years of control back? We need long-term pieces. Because now, unlike any deadline that, Gary, you've seen more than we have, but Lyle and I in our remembrance of life have not seen a deadline with the Mariners sitting in first place like this. Is this finally the time, if we're talking about guys who are more likely to be available? Rentals are always more likely to be available than guys with 3 years of control. Is there enough pliability in the philosophy of how the Mariners operate to go get a rental this year? A Pete, like the 2 popular ones, Pete Alonso, Christian Walker, if they're available, 2 teams that are in the wild card race right now. Paul Sewald's name gets thrown back out there again, a rental reliever. Like, is this the year that could be a possibility?
I think so. And part of it gets back to a couple guys just listed, like who is actually going to be available. because you thought for sure that Alonso would be available, and then Grimace threw out a first pitch, and now the Mets can't lose a game. So now they've vaulted themselves into this thing. So, and Arizona, which it looked like for a while was going to fall out of this thing, and now they're hanging around because everyone's hanging around. So to me, it comes down to that. Like, who is going to be available? Because I think they will. And if cost, of course, I mean, it always comes back to cost. Like, what are they going to cost? The Mariners just saw one of the decent arms that I'm intrigued by, Tanner Scott, who's along the lines of what you're talking about. He's a guy that's up after the end of this year. He would be a straight rental. So he's along the lines of who you're talking about, who I think will be available at the deadline. But yeah, I think they'd be willing to do anything to help this team get to where they want to get. I do think control is what they would love. Control. I mean, who would, right? If you could get a guy and also have him for 2 or 3 more years, that would be phenomenal. But I don't think they'd shy away from rental for the right price.
Do you think Grimace is available?
I mean, he's obviously he can obviously pitch. We know that. I mean, they should see. I mean, the Mets may get a package deal, Alonso and Grimace.
What goes back in return?
That's the great question. You know, the Grimace thing, I think is so funny, and it's the kind of thing that I love about baseball, because the everyday nature of baseball just lends itself to stupid stories like this that I absolutely love. Yeah. Just Grimace throws out a first pitch, and the Mets go on a winning streak. So thus, it was Grimace that made it happen. I just love it. I love it.
Last thing from me, Gary, as we're sitting and watching the amazingness of Logan Gilbert this year, he's got to be a favorite to start the All-Star game at this point. Like dead serious. This guy has a pretty good chance right now to start in Dallas in a month from now, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, let's take a step back for a second. I think he is certainly, 2 things are happening right now. His June has been utterly ridiculous, and I think he's certainly for pitcher of the month in June, which is always cool, I think, when a guy gets an award like that for an entire month. So I think he is the front runner right now for that. And I think he has squarely pitched himself onto the All-Star team, which is great because he's been close a couple of times. I think he's deserving. And I feel like, you know, with the big 3, I feel like he's the one that can sometimes get overlooked, especially from a national perspective. I don't think the people that watch him every time out, take him for granted and aren't aware of how good he is, because we get to see him every 5 days. We know how great he is. But I think he doesn't have that same reputation nationally. I think an all-star bid would certainly change that. And I think he is squarely in that. I think the tough part about starting the all-star game is there are a lot of great seasons being had in the American League. I think Heel was probably the front runner until he got blown up recently. So maybe it's a little bit more up in the air right now. But Gilbert is certainly in that conversation. And man, I would love for him to make it, because watching how he has transformed himself has been such a joy, because he came up as a fastball thrower. That's who he was. And the thing is, like, if he just would have been that guy, he probably would continue to have success and have a pretty good career and be effective. But he wanted more. And so every offseason, he changed his arsenal, and he's adapted, and he's worked, and he has completely changed himself as a pitcher. There have been multiple times this year where we have seen him have a start where he could not have had when he first came up, because his arsenal is different, and his slider is different, and the splitter, and everything else that he has going on. And I love seeing a guy get rewarded for that work, because he has put the work in. He has transformed himself into one of the best pitchers in baseball. And I do think he'll get rewarded as an all-star. And I think it'd be awesome to see him start the ball game, but at least make it. I think that'd be phenomenal. It's so deserved.
I almost call him a mad scientist in that way. We talked to Pitching Ninja about this a few weeks ago, that he's such a tinkerer and he is always looking for things to add to his arsenal. Like, I know he's already got the nickname of Walter, but if he ever needed a secondary nickname, that's kind of how I look at him, that he's kind of a mad scientist when he approaches pitching, and it works great for him.
Yeah, he's a real pitching nerd. He dives into everything. He has a lot of conversations with the opposition, great pitchers from the other side, just asking like how they go about it, how they throw. He's a sponge, man. He's just always taking it in. And I feel like the Mariners and Logan Gilbert are such a great marriage with everything the Mariners do. And we know how effective they are at turning dials on pitchers. I just feel like it's such a great match. And it's a great match for the Mariners. It's a great match for Logan. Like I think he was fortunate in a lot of ways to be drafted by the Mariners. It's just worked out perfectly for both sides, and we're seeing it. He's getting better and better. And the question I always ask now when you watch it play out, like, what is the ceiling? Like, what are we talking about with Logan Gilbert here? Where does this go? Like, Cy Young competition, top 5, top 3, a Cy Young award? Like, where does this go? And I think it's super cool to think about, because I don't know. I don't know where the limit is on him. I don't think we can put a limit on where he can go, given what we've seen and how he's transformed himself.
Well, Gary, this has been fantastic. We always appreciate you taking some time to join us. Hope you have a couple good last days on the food tour down there in Florida before we see you back here at the ballpark this weekend and throughout next week. Thanks so much for taking some time to join us.
Anytime. It'll be great to see you back at the park. I know I speak for all of us in saying we can't wait to get back home.
Well, it's always great to catch up with Gary. Hopefully you guys took some things away from that conversation about the trade deadline, about the Mariners' home road numbers this year, and a few other things as well. We love having Gary on. Really smart dude. Appreciate all his time. And with that, that'll just about wrap up this edition of the Marine Layer Podcast. You guys know the drill. If you want to listen to the full form podcast, you can do so wherever you get your audio pods. Make sure to download, make sure to leave a 5-star review, make sure to leave a written review. It all helps us out a bunch. Like, comment, subscribe over on YouTube. Don't forget to do that. And then check us out all across social media. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube Shorts at Marine Layer Pod. That's TJ. I'm Lyle. As always, we thank you guys for tuning in. Talk to you soon.